Good evening, everyone, and welcome to An Evening with Rick Steves. I'm David McGowan, CEO of WJCT Public Media, and I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Rick Steves, host and creator of Rick Steves Europe, the long-running public television program, and Travel with Rick Steves on radio. Rick also operates a travel company alongside his production company. Welcome to Jacksonville virtually, Rick.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
Before we go even 1 minute further, I'd like to make everyone aware, if you're not already, that Rick Steves Europe has programs running all summer long across the full family of Jax PBS channels, including the program Europe Awaits this weekend on the Jax PBS More channel, and that his radio program runs Saturday mornings on WJCT News 89.9. His Best of the Alps program is also coming up on Jax PBS. And I'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsor of this evening's event, the St. Johns County Cultural Council. And finally, just a few procedural details before we get going. We're going to spend the first part of our hour together in conversation, and then we'd like to get to your questions. So please submit your questions in the chat as we go, and letting us know what part of the area you're from, and then we'll be able to turn to them. So as we turn to our conversation, we'd like to kick off with a short video about why we travel. Rick, would you like to introduce it?
Yeah, David. You know, this is the only show I've been able to produce during COVID. And I wanted to produce a show after 30 years of making TV shows and a lifetime of traveling that just celebrated the beauty of travel and the value of travel. It's called Why We Travel. It was like a love note to travel. It's got about half as many words as a normal half-hour episode that you air on your station, but sort of double the emotion and the romance of travel. And it's just the first 3 or 4 minutes of the 30-minute show. But I thought that would kick it off and celebrate, that we're going to come out of this COVID pandemic and we're going to be traveling again. And there's a lot of fun that awaits us. So I'd love to share that with our viewers right now.
Great. Let's see it.
We travel as tourists to have experiences, to have fun. Going to new places invigorates us. It's exciting.
On the road, we get more out of our lives. Seeing our first Michelangelo. Exploring our first castle. Savoring something straight from the sea. Reaching for high-altitude thrills. Being enthralled. Of course, travel is fun. Relaxing with abandon. Not acting our age. Going for broke. Joining the party. Travel is also sensual. We see like an artist. We listen like a poet. We taste the unfamiliar. We celebrate with all our senses.
Fantastical.
Travel heightens our emotions. It makes us really feel deeply the beauty, vividly the power, and thoughtfully the humanity. This enhanced experience changes us. It stokes our appetite for life. Travel is also about people, relationships. We savor conviviality. With old friends, and with new friends. We laugh with abandon. Shared experiences become lifelong memories. My earliest travel experiences, captured on the road decades ago in journals and postcards, remain some of my most treasured memories. The writing kept telling the story of how travel makes the world your friend. June 3rd, 1980, Dingle Peninsula. I really didn't know where I was going. I just stuck out my thumb in whichever direction the car was. July 7, York. The evening was spent enchanted in the church, listening to a Bach Mass in B minor. My landlady looked out the window and cheered to me, saying, "Ah, another day of softness." But I have a strange, almost cocky optimism, a feeling that things will somehow work out for the best. Travel can change our perspective. We discover there's more to life than increasing its speed. As we experience new things, we pause. We reflect. We let the experience breathe. With less hurry, we're able to appreciate nature. To be overwhelmed by it. To notice its power. Its richness. The sweep of the weather. The roar of the river. The freshness of springtime. We notice the light. We savor it. We marvel at the beauty it creates. Every sunset is a devotional, reminding us that life is good. Travel engages us in every sense. This is why we travel. We travel for the experience.
And the wine falls down.
That was great, Rick. You've got many fans here in Northeast Florida, as you do all around the country. And as I have asked many of them what it is they'd like me to ask you, I think the number one question would be, how do I get that job? That job where you're having all the fun, doing all that stuff. I'm sure people would be interested to know how you got started in all this.
Yeah. Well, I think back on that a lot. And so many of us are kind of like a result of how good our parents did their work. And my parents worked very hard to get me with a broader perspective. And I'm very privileged that way. My dad was a piano tuner up here in Seattle. And I probably would have never even had a passport had he not decided to import pianos from Germany. So I remember one day in 7th or 8th, I guess it was 8th grade, he came home and said, "Son, we're going to Europe to see the piano factories." And I thought, Dad, that's a stupid idea. But we went to Germany to see the piano factories. And on about day 2, I realized this is really interesting. And the world is a fascinating place. And a year after that, I decided I'm going to go back to Europe every year for the rest of my life. And the year after that, I decided I don't need my parents for this. And I've been doing that. And at first, I just traveled for kicks. I was a piano teacher. The kids wouldn't practice in the summer. I thought, I'm not going to struggle with this. I'll see you in September. I'm going to Europe. And I was on a very tight budget, as you can imagine. And I was learning from my mistakes. And I love to teach. The only 2 jobs I've ever had is piano teaching and travel teaching. And they're the 2 things I really love. And it occurred to me, I was becoming a good traveler. I thought if I could just package the lessons I've made from my mistakes and teach them, other people could learn from my mistakes rather than their own and have a better trip. And I'd have a good excuse to go back to Europe every year and update my material. And that's what I've been doing. And today this is 40 years later, and is it 40 years later? God, it's a long time. It's more than 40 years later. And I'm doing the same thing, but I've got a crew of 100 hardworking people here in Seattle. I've got technology beyond my wildest dreams to amplify my teaching. I've got a wonderful gig at public television. I'm so thankful. There's one place on the dial where we can assume an attention span and, respect people's intelligence and, be driven by a passion for not keeping advertisers happy, but just inspiring our viewers to reach out and embrace the world with all its wonder and diversity. And I love my work. So anybody could do this. You just have to spend decades focusing on the same thing with a lot of passion. And you've got to measure your profit not by how much money to make, but by how many people's perspectives do you change. That's my goal.
You have really built a substantial operation there, right? You have, as you said, 100 people and a tour business and a guidebook business and the television programs and the radio programs. I mean, what would you say, what lesson would you, other than perseverance, which seems like a big part of it, and doing something that you care about deeply, that seems like something you also would say. What other advice would you give to the budding sort of entrepreneurs out there looking to build a business that you have?
I love entrepreneurship. Well, what would advice I would give? Have a mission. You know, no offense to Orlando, but our mission is to inspire Americans to venture beyond Orlando. And we do that with all our heart and soul. We just really think the United States is 4% of this planet, and there's 96% out there, and it's more important than ever that we get to know them. As I mentioned, you know, my profit is not how much money I make, but it's how many trips do I impact. And then right from the start, I've been very enthusiastic about just spreading my information. My information is a publicity stunt. And I just, you know, I love to talk like we're doing right now, to share my passion for European travel. I've been really fortunate to have great friends and colleagues that work with me. As I mentioned, I've got 100 people on our payroll. It's not nice to have 100 people on your payroll during COVID because you can't travel. So this has been a tough couple of years, but we're keeping our team together, and we fully expect to be traveling again come early 2022. But I've been lucky. I found a niche that works, and I'm just, you know, a lot of my friends are retiring now, but I'm just having more fun than ever. So this is kind of why I'm here. I just love to go over there and make a lot of mistakes, take careful notes. When I get ripped off, I celebrate because they don't know who they just ripped off. I'm going to learn that scam and come home and tell people all about it. and you know, not to get back all the time to public television, but I'm a teacher. I've got a passion for something. I've got something to share that's a different angle. And I've got a platform where I'm free to do that. If I think people should get excited about Martin Luther and the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, as you know, I can make a 1-hour TV show on it. And if I do it well, you'll run it. And then people understand the importance of Martin Luther. You know, we just did an hour show on Egypt, which was really a thrill. And I believe you've run that. Mm-hmm. We did our Hunger and Hope show from lessons learned from Ethiopia and Guatemala. That was a thrill to learn about and to take the crew there and produce. And it's very important information. We went to Iran. We went to the Holy Land and tried to get a dual narrative perspective on Israel and Palestine, you know, because if there's a wall, there's two sides to the wall, and you got to travel on both sides of the wall and talk to people on both sides of the wall, or you're going to not know what's going on. It's a complicated issue, but we accomplished a lot, I think, by going to the Holy Land, thanks to public television, and producing a 1-hour show on that complicated region. There's a lot of scholars that can talk about the Holy Land and Palestine and the biblical history and the difference between Islam and Christendom and so on. But I get to take it through the lens of a traveler. And that really is kind of fun, I think, and refreshing. So I'm sorry. Last thing I want to do is interrupt you, Rick. You mentioned your program on Ethiopia, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about that because it seems like a little bit of a departure from you, away from Europe. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about the differences in traveling in the developing world versus the wealthier Western world, and you know, what lessons you think you might impart for exploring that part of the world. Well, if you don't want culture shock, don't go to the developing world. I like culture shock. For me, culture shock is the growing pains of a broadening perspective. And part of my work as a tour guide and a travel writer and a TV host and so on is to equip and inspire people to get out of their comfort zone. Mm-hmm. The greatest experiences I've had are in the countries that have been less comfortable. You know, going to Cuba, going to Nicaragua, going to Egypt, Ethiopia, Guatemala, Iran, the Soviet Union, and back in the old days, and so on. Those are the rich experiences. Do I relax, and is it sort of a vacation? Not really. It's just a transformational experience, and I treasure those opportunities. Going to the, when I go with the TV crew, it's different than travel because we are worried about getting the show covered and having a safe place to recharge our batteries and get a good night's sleep and all that. So I'm trying to look like I'm immersed in the culture, but really I'm trying to make a great TV show and not get sick and make sure our gear is all in one piece. So, but almost always, every time except for my Iran show, I've made a trip ahead of time to scout it. And that's where I have all the magic, because it's just me and a local guide and my notepad. And I love that. And then I get to come home, and the writing challenge is to put that into a good script. I get 3,000 words for a half-hour episode, and I get 6,000 words for a 1 hour episode. And usually what I've got to say takes 10,000 words. So it's a trick to get it down. I don't have the luxury of Ken Burns, who can just let it go as long as he wants. I got to limit it to an hour. And I like that discipline, because sometimes less is more when you're making TV.
So, Rick, you wrote a book in 2009 called Travel as a Political Act. And I wonder if you could explain a little bit what you meant by that.
Yeah, this is that book here, David, Travel as a Political Act. And, all over the United States, I was giving talks about travel. And it's hard for me to talk about travel without talking about topics that people might think are political, climate change, poverty, war, freedom. How do you go to Russia and not talk about freedom? How do you go to Iran or Turkey or Palestine without talking about the separation of mosque and state? Just like in the United States, we treasure the separation of church and state. These, for me as a travel teacher, are really exciting. I mean, I go to Denmark and I talk to people who willingly pay more taxes than I do. And I kind of go, well, what's with you people? So satisfied to pay taxes. Well, we trust in our institutions and we have high expectations, and we read it in a more complex thing than just higher taxes, because we have education and health and our retirements and our parental leave and so on all taken care of. So I love to have my ethnocentricity challenged. When I went to India, which is my favorite country, I was just blown away at how it walloped my ethnocentrism. I realized people that sit on a toilet are not the norm. We're the oddballs on this planet. People who use a spoon and fork are not the norm. We're the oddballs. Who would have ever thought we're the oddballs? A third of the planet uses chopsticks, and a third of the planet uses their fingers. And as a man in Afghanistan once told me, we're all civilized just the same. That's not comfortable. Thomas Jefferson wrote that travel makes a person wiser, if less happy. Do you want to be happy, or do you want to have a broader perspective in your life? If you just want to be kind of clueless and go to your grave with a nice apron for barbecues and scrapbooks with all your friends that have the same complexion and religion that you do, well, that's fine. That's an option. But I don't want to do that. I celebrate the world in its diversity, and I just love that. So this book is a book that shares, as you can tell, I think just by that, my enthusiasm for getting out of your comfort zone. And I'm my own best example. I was raised thinking the world is a pyramid with us on top and everybody else trying to get there. And then I traveled and I realized, no, I mean, I live here. I would live nowhere else. I love being an American, and I love our lifestyle and our tempo of life and our passion for this and that. But Belgians wouldn't trade places. Bulgarians wouldn't trade places. My friends in Sri Lanka don't have the Sri Lankan dream. They don't have the American dream. They've got the Sri Lankan dream. And these are all just little snippets out of what I put in here. So, of course, when I'm making a TV show, David, I have to be careful that I don't have sort of agenda journalism. I have to go there and just kind of share what I learned and then let other people draw conclusions from that. But I spent 25 years leading tours in my tour company. And in that case, I've got 25 Americans trapped in my classroom on the bus, and I have the mic. And I learned the hard way, you cannot abuse the bully pulpit. People shut you down.
Right.
So I think that was good training for me in that regard, is our tour program. And to this day, we take 30,000 people a year on our tours in a good year with 1,200 different tours. I've got 100 guides in Europe. And I think I'm the only tour company that tells my guides, yes, talk about religion. Yes, talk about politics. Yes, talk about soccer. Those are the three things Europeans say you shouldn't talk about because people get confused or challenged. Do it respectfully. Do it in a fun-loving way to learn more and broaden your perspectives. But I love to learn from people who have different truths that they find self-evident and God-given.
Right. I'd like to pick up on one phrase that you mentioned in all that, which was about climate change. How should we think about travel in this time when we know travel has a heavy carbon footprint, and we're all urged to think about that, as we should.
Yeah.
And I know this is an area that you've done a lot of work in. So can you share your thinking on that?
Yeah, David, for years, I was aware that we're part of the problem when we promote travel, but I couldn't figure out a good way to mitigate it. Now, I firmly believe that I understand you could stop your carbon output by stopping the travel. You can be flight shamed out of your travels. But I really believe travel is worth the cost because it helps our world connect in ways that we could never connect otherwise, and that's more needed than ever. But I also believe we should be taxed for our carbon so we can be carbon neutral. Now, a person flying from Florida to Europe and back creates about as much, the way scientists explain it, and it's pretty much, I'm no scientist, but I believe this stuff, you create about as much carbon as you create by driving your car for 6 months. That's not good. But you can mitigate it by smartly investing $30 in carbon mitigation initiatives. Now, the conventional way to do that here is to buy carbon offsets. I wanted to be a little more global and creative. So what I did to make my company carbon neutral was invest that $30 per traveler to make them honestly carbon neutral in their flights over there and back from the United States. I invested it in what's called climate smart agriculture and forestry programs, which is related in the developing world, knowing that half of humanity, half of all the people on this planet are smallholder family farms in the developing world, where people earn $5 a day. 10% of our planet is in extreme poverty, earning $2 a day. These people are desperate just to feed their kids, and they're farming any way they can, which can be very destructive when you think it's half of humanity to the environment. Smart programs from the rich developed world, funded by organizations that I support through this program, are helping developing world farmers farm in a way that is less expensive for the carbon problem. And with a little advice, just having a smart stove that consumes a third of the wood, you could make a huge difference. Just knowing how to terrace and keep the water that now comes down in torrents instead of light sprinkles, you'll lose less topsoil and you'll have that water to get you through the upcoming drought. Having the right seeds can survive the more violent weather and the difficulties caused by climate change. This is climate smart agriculture. So what I did, sorry, it takes a minute to describe this, but I think it's important. And I'm, as an enthusiast for travel, I think it's ethical to be honest about how travel contributes to climate change. I said, okay, I take 30,000 people to Europe on my Rick Steves tour company. That's $30 times 30,000, $900,000. I made $900,000 more than I should have because I didn't need to pay for the carbon I created by having a profitable business. I want to be an ethical businessman. I wish our government taxed us for this, but of course that's not going to happen in the United States. So I tax myself. I rounded it up to $1 million. And then we developed this program called the Climate Smart Initiative, where we gave $100,000 grants to 10 companies that are doing this in the developing world. And it makes my travelers going to Europe and back carbon neutral. This last year, we didn't have anybody traveling, but I'm so enthusiastic about what was accomplished the year before that we gave half of it, $50,000 instead of $100,000 to those 10 organizations to keep them going through COVID. But we're going to ramp it right back up next year when we get traveling again. And I'm not bragging about it because it's not heroic. It's just ethical. We're not doing anything extra. We're just doing what I think our government should make us do in order to be honest with our carbon impact. And at the top of my program on my website, it says, if you're a tour operator, please steal this program and do not credit me. It's just important for the travel industry to get smart with this because we want our kids and their children to be able to travel just like we have. And the way things are going, they won't be doing that. And that's not a very ethical way to run our lives and make our money in my case.
Right. Well, I'm sure, Rick, that we're going to get a lot of questions about travel-specific items from our audience. But I wanted to ask you about some of the other things that I know that you are involved in and passionate about. You have been an advocate for the legalization of marijuana, I know, and also done a lot of work on behalf of the homeless among us. And I'd like to just get you to speak about both of those things, if you wouldn't mind, and talk about your views and why you became involved in those causes.
Oh, well, thank you, David. And I should preface this by saying it's a long story for all of these, and people can go to my website and look in the social activism part of my page. But it's sort of the consequence of being a traveler and traveling with your eyes open and talking to people. In the United States, we smoke more marijuana per capita than Europe does, and we lock up all sorts of people. And they treat their word for addiction is enslaved. They don't look at drug addicts as criminals. They look at the people that need some help, counseling, nursing, a little loving care, and they do that in a pragmatic way. It's called pragmatic harm reduction. So I realized a joint's about as exciting as a can of beer in Europe, and they don't have people in jail for smoking marijuana. And I just thought, I'm going to come home. Nobody can talk about it because everybody's afraid of it. I can't be fired. I don't need to be elected. I can just blame my European friends. So for 20 years, I've been trying to help legalize marijuana. Just today, Connecticut legalized recreational marijuana. But 10 years ago, I was a co-sponsor and a leading funder and spokesperson for the law in Washington State, where we in Colorado legalized marijuana for the first time of any political entity. I'm not talking medical. I'm not talking decriminalized. I'm just talking, if you want to smoke marijuana just for fun, you can do it if you do it at home and you don't hurt anybody. That's just recreational marijuana. And we just decided this is pragmatic harm reduction. My hunch was, from the European record, that more people won't smoke if you legalize. There's this American notion that there's a whole reservoir of wonderful people who would just love to ruin their lives smoking pot if only it was legal. But every society's track record is there's no correlation between how strict are the laws and how many people smoke. And sure enough, in our country today, half of the states it's legal, half of the states it's not. And there's really no correlation. People who want to smoke pot do. In some states, it's a thriving black market, and there's a lot of people, mostly people of color and poor people in jail. In other states, it's part of their tourism, and it's a thriving, highly taxed, highly regulated legal market. In my state, it's $1 billion legal market that rivals Apple's. And this year, I'm a friend of our governor, Jay Inslee, and he has to arrest 10,000 people less. He doesn't have to arrest 10,000 people he would have in previous years. And $1 billion black market that used to enrich and empower gangs and organized crime now is a highly taxed, highly regulated legal market, employing people in rural corners where they need employment opportunities, and they're taxing the heck out of it. It raises, I believe, $400 million a year in tax revenue for Olympia, and consumption is the same. Teen use has actually gone down, according to our state government's Department of Health, and safety on the road is just absolutely the same. And now we treat it as an education and a health challenge instead of something where you lock people up. So I go every 2 years, I go around the country, invest a lot of time and money in trying to legalize marijuana just because it's the prohibition of our age, and I can talk about it, and a lot of people are afraid to. And this year, I've just become the chair of the board at NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And I know it's a big discussion in Florida. And we'll be coming, your way. But I do want to remind people it's not a pro-marijuana movement. Most of my friends that are really active in drug policy reform are motivated by common sense, public health, and fighting racism and getting rid of black markets, as well as a principled stance on defending civil liberties. I'm in NORML because I care about civil liberties. I just really believe that, I'm a hardworking, church-going, tax-paying, kid-raising American. If I work all day long, really hard, and I want to go home and smoke a joint and just look at the fireplace for 3 hours, that's my civil liberty. Now, can I get in my car and drive? Of course not. Can I sell it to some minor? Of course not. This is just good policy. So that's a long-winded answer to a short question, but I'm really excited about what we've been doing. And this year already, 5 states have legalized. It was kind of slow, and now for the first time, there's an act in Congress right now, the MORE Act, where they want to deschedule it. 50 years ago this week, President Nixon declared the war on drugs. And marijuana got stuck right up there with heroin and LSD because Nixon hated the hippies, and that was their favorite, drug. And the result is a tragedy in our countries, not for rich white guys, not for privileged people, but for poor people. In Florida, you got millions of ex-felons whose lives have been pretty messed up because they happen to be poor or person of color when it comes to marijuana. There's a lot of people in jail for nonviolent marijuana offenses. So it's a hard issue. And I want to remind people it's not pro-drugs. It's common sense. It's pragmatic harm reduction. It's end the black market. It's defend civil liberties. It's to, help fight racism. There's a lot of reasons to get involved. And I'm proud of that on what we're doing.
I'm going to take us back to Europe for a minute before we go to our audience questions. Rick, I've heard you say that Germany is one of your favorite, maybe your favorite European culture, and I also had a chance to work in Germany for several years in Frankfurt and Cologne, and it makes me wonder, what is it about German culture that is so interesting to you? What is it that attracts you to it?
Part of it is the rest of my staff is crazy about France and Italy, so somebody's got to stick up for Germany.
You're just a contrarian.
I'm a generalist. I like all over Europe, and I'm Norwegian, so I tend to be focused on the northern half of Europe. But Germany is just a wonderful example of the story of Germany is so cool. I mean, 150 years ago, there was a bunch of little German-speaking states, but no Germany. And of course, they figured out how to unite around 1870. And overnight, it was the biggest power in Europe from an industrial point of view. And then, of course, we have two very painful wars and a lot going on. And then Europe starts to unite after World War II. Can you imagine being a caring European citizen and twice in your lifetime, you're digging out after a world war? So in the late 40s, they really got together and they said, we got to do something. And what they decided to do was create a union where they weave together the economies of France and Germany so there can never be a big European war again. That's the accomplishment of the European Union, and that's very exciting. And I like to go to Germany because I like the history. I love the passion for music. I like the food. I would specialize, I suppose, in German history. I just find German history fascinating. In fact, we made our TV show that I think you guys have aired about lessons from European fascism in the 20th century. That was a show we made inspired by how Germany, well, most of Europe was fascist in the 1930s, of course, led by Germany. And these guys, Franco, Mussolini, Hitler, Salazar, it was like they're reading out of a playbook on how to derail their democracies and turn it into an autocracy. Whether you're a left-wing wannabe dictator or a right-wing wannabe dictator, there's a way that you derail the democracy in your society. And it's scary how societies all over the democratic and free West that we like to think are having this challenge right now, as there's a lot of fear and a lot of anger and a lot of frustration and a lot of migrant pressure and just a lot of frustration. And there's a lot of people that love power and they know how to get it.
So I'm going to take a minute now and just put in a plug for WJCT. If you enjoy this session, I don't want to call it a program, but this session this evening, and you'd like to see more of them, please consider making a gift to WJCT Public Media. You can do so right in the chat. There should be a button visible, or look for the red button with the 3 dots in it, and please go ahead and consider making a gift. We would very much appreciate that. We depend on your support to bring you all the services that we bring you here across the region, including Jax PBS, the home of Rick's Europe, WJCT News 89.9, the television program, and of course, other services just like this that we're participating in this evening.
And David, I've got to jump in there and just remind people, media has never been more important in how it shapes people's outlooks, especially young people. And it's such a blessing to have one place on the dial that is not driven by keeping advertisers happy. I mean, I'm glad there's commercial television and commercial radio. That's a lot of fun. But I really appreciate that one spot on the dial that is not seeing us as shoppers and eyeballs on some ratings chart, but that sees us as neighbors and fellow citizens. And that's public broadcasting. And I know you've got radio and television. It's a beautiful, efficient sort of partnership that way. And I just really hope that people recognize the value of that, because there are powerful forces in our society that would find it convenient and profitable if we were all just dumbed down. Why are some people offended by media that inspires us to be engaged and to be smarter? Because it's in their interest that we're simplified and dumbed down. I'm so thankful I've got this one little place on the dial where I can produce programming, as I mentioned, that respects people's intelligence and assumes an attention span. And it doesn't happen without public support. And anybody who supports WJCT at any level is doing way more than their share. And it's just really good to do more than your share sometimes. If you believe in the value of public broadcasting, non-commercial broadcasting, I think it's good citizenship to help make it strong. That's why I spend every chance I get like this.
I can't say it any better than that. So thank you, Rick, very much. We're going to go to questions in a minute. Before we do, we're going to play one more video. Rick, would you like to introduce that one?
Oh, thank you. This is so fun to be able to share this. As I mentioned, this program was the only thing we produced during COVID. So the on-cameras were on campus at the University of Washington in Seattle, out of focus in the back so you can't see people with masks. And then we shot it also something on my deck right here overlooking Puget Sound. But this is the last 3 or 4 minutes of this show called Why We Travel. And the structure of the show is to remind people you can travel for 3 different ways: as a tourist, a traveler, and a pilgrim. A tourist just travels for fun and to check off things on their bucket list, which is fine. A traveler travels to learn, I think, and broaden their perspective. And a pilgrim travels knowing that you learn more about yourself and your home when you leave your home and you look at it from a distance. And a pilgrim travel is out there just to better understand what life is all about. And I just love the idea that all 3 of these things can work together any way you like. And this is the finale of that half-hour program. And it's all about how traveling helps us connect. And these connections are more important than ever coming out of COVID. So we'll just see the capper of this show now called Why We Travel.
Right.
By traveling thoughtfully, we connect. Even for those of us who can only travel as a state of mind, travel can result in a deeper connection.
Travel connects us face to face with reality. It's not virtual. It's not through a viewfinder. Travel is candid, honest, being in the moment.
Okay. Thank you.
In a world hungry for authenticity, we yearn for connection.
But now she's quite big. She's like you, about like that, yeah.
Travelers connect with different cultures, different people. On the road, strangers are just friends we've yet to meet. Travel frees us from routine. It creates room for serendipity.
Okay, so now I'm ready to be a shepherd.
Serendipity leads to connections. Travel forces us to bend and to flex. It makes us more tolerant and inspires us to celebrate diversity. The lessons I've gained from exploring Europe, the land of my heritage, are universal. For me, these lessons are affirmed and then stretched when traveling further afield. As a child ventures beyond his backyard, I ventured beyond Europe. Year after year, I pushed my boundaries. The world opened wide with a montage of wonders and lessons learned. Traveling beyond my comfort zone, culture shock became constructive. The growing pains of a broadening perspective, my ethnocentrism challenged. The celebration of difference and oneness at the same time. The recognition that love is love in their home just as in mine.
I think this is a beautiful, beautiful welcome here.
Through travel, we see a world filled with joy, with compassion, and with good people. We learn the more we reach out, the more we receive. We learn that we all share the same world.
Nice.
And we all share the same window of time. Travelers seek bridges rather than walls. Every wall has 2 sides and 2 narratives. For one to be truly understood, both must be heard. Traveling, we realize the challenges of our future will be blind to borders and best overcome not by conflict and walls, but by community and bridges. There's so much fear these days. The flip side of fear? It's understanding. And we gain understanding when we travel.
What is this? The celebration of Obama's.
Travel is more than a holiday. It gives us new experiences, acts as our greatest teacher, makes our lives more meaningful, and connects us with a global family. We can't all travel physically, but anyone can live with a traveler's mindset. It's a choice. Travel makes us more comfortable with the world, our hearts bigger, and our lives richer. And it makes us happier. And that is why we travel.
Oh, Rick, there are some great scenes there. And now I know that that's your beautiful deck.
That's my deck, yeah. And I never had flowers on my deck until this year because I've got a girlfriend that loves flowers, and I'm really lucky. It was a nice frame for that little shot there.
That looks great. So turning to our audience for questions now, we've got Kimberly in St. Augustine, who is looking to travel out of the country for the first time and with her kids, 11, 14, and 18 years old. And she wonders if you have any good suggestions to, quote, get our feet wet with international travel.
Wow, Kimberly, that is so important from a parenting point of view. And, if you can afford it, it's a great thing. Parents it's a loving thing to take your kids on your trip of your lifetime, but you have to be realistic. It cuts into what you can do as adults when you're traveling, because a lot of it's focused on keeping the kids happy. But if you're good with that, we took our kids to Europe, 2 of them, every year for 18 years, from prenatal until they had been graduated from high school. And I didn't know at the time, but they were soaking it all up, and now they're friendly with the world. And I'm so thankful for that. I would remember you want to start in a culturally easy zone and work into the more complicated areas. You wouldn't want to fly straight into Naples, I think you might want to start in Scotland or Britain or Ireland or something like that. And then you can move over to the continent. And there's lots of tips, practical tips when you're traveling with kids on how to make that work. I find you don't want to worry about packing light like we do when we're traveling adults with an adult partner. I like to get a car so that you can be more mobile. I love the idea of traveling with a family. When you got a car, then the kids have their zone and you've got, you don't have to carry everything. I think we took our kids out of school every year in the spring to go to Europe. And the teachers were happy with it. They just thought the kids are going to learn more in Europe than they are sitting in the classroom. And I think, they did their homework while they're on the road and so on. But that worked really well. One thing I would always do is encourage the kids to write a journal. As you saw, my journals are treasured now. And I was writing journals when I was 14 years old. And those are just a good discipline when you're on the road. And also give the kids a little extra money on their allowance because you've got a little extra money on yours too. But have them put it in a money belt and it comes with a few strings attached.
So, Rick, we have people tuning in actually from all over the country, as it turns out, in addition to all over this area. But Dan from Arizona wants to know if you have some must-sees on a Baltic cruise for him.
Oh, Dan, I wrote a book about cruise ports in the Mediterranean, and that was so much fun and so successful and helpful for people that we wrote another cruise book on Northern Europe. And the Baltic ports, you would think Helsinki, Tallinn, and St. Petersburg, I think. And I love each of those places. We're running a show on Create coming up, which is Baltic Sisters. It's Tallinn and Helsinki. I was just working on that an hour before we got together this right now. But I would say to remember, cruising is very efficient. It's very economical. And it's very front door. I mean, it's filled with a bunch of people who are not necessarily good travelers. But I would say on a big cruise ship, there's 3,000 people. One of them are just looking for a floating alternative to Las Vegas. 1,000 of them are bucket list travelers. They just want to see a lot of famous places before they die, and they better hurry up. And the third of the people on the ship, the 3,000 would be real travelers that just want to move into a hotel once and are prepared. They've got their guidebook. And as soon as that ship is docked, they're on the mainland. And one thing I'd remind you, you can take the initiative and in 15 minutes be away from all of the cruise crowd. And then you're really traveling. Or you can just buy into the organized bus tour and let them do all the driving and have it on stage. Either way, it's fun. I highly recommend the cruise of Northern Europe. All of Northern Europe, if you think about it. Bergen, Oslo, Copenhagen, Stockholm, Helsinki, Tallinn, St. Petersburg. Wonderful, wonderful places. One crazy stop is Warnemünde because it's called Berlin, but it's like a 3-hour train ride away from Berlin. So you leave at 8 a.m, you get to Berlin and you have 6 hours to see Berlin, then you take the train all the way back. That is a lot of train travel for a little time in a great city. But I really like the notion of jumping ship in St. Petersburg. That's what I did. It was the end of the cruise. From there, it was going to go all the way back to Copenhagen and then you'd be done. I just left the ship. You can do that. You got to let them know. And then I extended my time in St. Petersburg by 4 days or 5 days. And that is an incredible city. So you got a lot of good options there.
So you mentioned St. Petersburg. We have a question about recommendations on traveling in the former Soviet Union.
Well, the former Soviet Union is mostly Russia, and Russia is not it's a place I don't like in general because they still seem to be run by in-tourists from a tourism point of view. Everything is careful and everything is more expensive for Westerners, and there's a law and order problem in Russia that troubles me. Having said that, I've been to Moscow and St. Petersburg in recent years, but when they've been free and the Soviet Union's long gone. And St. Petersburg is a wonderful city. It's just complicated because they're not quite as safe and relaxing as farther west. Having said that, the Baltic states, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania are wonderful for travel. And Georgia, people love Georgia, and people love Ukraine, Kiev. I think Georgia is high on my list, David. And you got to remember, when you get to Vienna or you get to Frankfurt, it's just as easy to fly to Georgia. And I'm not talking Atlanta, I'm talking Tbilisi, as it is to fly to Stockholm or to, Dublin.
And I will put in a plug I worked for 3 years in Budapest, and I know you just recently saw your program on Budapest in Eastern Europe, a very beautiful city. People don't realize, I think, sometimes how beautiful Budapest
amazing. Is. Yeah, and I was thinking the USSR, but if you're thinking the former communist world, that includes the Warsaw Pact. We Americans have a little bit of a name problem because we think the dividing point in Europe is the Iron Curtain. So you have West free and East communist, and that's been gone now for 40 years. But all those countries that were behind the Iron Curtain, those are actually Central Europe. If you tell a person in Hungary or Czech Republic or Slovenia that they're Eastern Europeans, they'd think you're still living in the Cold War. Eastern Europe would be former Soviet Union, Georgia, Ukraine, Belarus, White Russia, and Russia, and so on. Central Europe is what we think of as Eastern Europe. And in Central Europe, you got wonderful places in Croatia, in Bosnia. When we had to cancel down last year because of COVID, I had the crew already, permissions made, flights booked, and scripts written to do 2 wonderful TV shows in Poland. But we had to scrap that along with 2 shows in Iceland. But Poland is a wonderful place to travel also. So yeah, I'm enthusiastic about that. You mentioned Budapest. Prague is like everybody's favorite Eastern European city, but the connoisseurs actually appreciate Budapest even more than Prague.
So I have a very practical question from Stephen about money in Europe, and says, ATM fees can be expensive. How do you recommend travelers handle their currency issues?
Did you mention ATMs are expensive?
Yes.
Well, not really, because you got to compare it not with just having a dollar and a dollar, but changing a dollar to a Deutschmark or a dollar to a euro or a dollar to a pound. It's expensive to change money. That's what's expensive. Using an ATM when you're traveling, is cheaper than using a traveler's check and going to the teller at the bank, you see. So I love ATMs when I'm traveling, and I assume I'm going to lose a few percent. You want to change smartly. If you're in Copenhagen for a day, you don't want to change $500 and then change back $400. You've changed $900 at a uniform 3 or 4% loss for the very expensive privilege of spending $100. You want to change $100 and change back nothing, ideally, and then you'll minimize your costs. But this is the kind of practical details that I talk about in my book, Europe Through the Back Door, and I've got like 5 hours of lectures on just simple travel skills on my website. It's all free. And if anybody wants to go there, they can see my 1-hour talk on cruising, or my 1-hour talk on packing, or my 20-minute talk on finances in Europe. Or we've got a tech specialist that talks about iPhones and tech on the road and so on. And it's just really important stuff. So that's important when you're traveling, to know how to change money smartly. But for me, I go to an ATM. It's nice because it's open 24/7 with the same rates. You get this better rate really at an ATM than in the old days when you had cash at the bank's desk.
So Kathy asks, if you happen to have physical disability issues, but you really are completely bought into what Rick Steves is telling us right now about the wonders of travel, are there specific resources that you can turn to understand places that are going to be more accessible?
Yeah. There's an organization called Mobility International, and there's other organizations that help people that have physical disabilities. I got to remind people, we live in a profit-oriented, money-making world. And if you wish there was more information for disabled travel, you got to remember most people are not charities. It's a business, and it's a tiny market. I wrote a book once called Accessible Europe, and I put a lot into it, and I really loved the book, and it sold in the hundreds, and you cannot make a book that sells in the hundreds. You just can't do it unless you have some benefactor to help you out. I would remind you that regardless if you're able to walk or you just want to take it easy physically, and if you're an older traveler or something like this, the most demanding thing physically about travel, I think, is the heat and the crowds of summer. Give yourself a break. It's really hot and it's really crowded in the summer. Go in the shoulder season. And with my staff, we just had a meeting and we decided in the Rick Steves world to move shoulder season 1 month farther away because it's getting so hot and crowded. So I just think bundle up and go in March or April or October, and you'll be thankful, because I do not. If you look at all my TV shows, David, over the years, I can't remember what I did yesterday, but I know every show in the Mediterranean was filmed in April or May, and every show in the Alps or North was filmed in July or August, because that's what I do every normal year. As I go to Europe for 4 months, 2 months in the spring for the Mediterranean world, then I go home for June, and then 2 months in the middle of summer for the Alps and to the North. And I want good weather. I want crowds. I want the heat in the North, because the crowds are never really a problem, and it enlivens things. But in the Mediterranean world, you want to stay away from the crowds, and you want to stay away from the heat.
And so Rachel asks, what is a favorite spot for travelers interested in history? I mean, I would guess all over Europe, but do you have some favorites that you could share?
Wow. I've made a 5-hour lecture on the history and the art of Europe, and it's for free on my website. I'd love for Rachel to be able to see that. I got a European history degree accidentally. I didn't plan to. I remember waking up in the dorm one morning and it occurred to me, I've got 7 history classes under my belt, 3 more and I'm a historian. Let's push on through. But I just thought it was storytelling and I was getting credit for it. It's like too good to be true. But I love European history. And the great thing about history is it makes your sightseeing more rewarding. I wish I could get you a half-price ticket for, the Roman Colosseum or the Pont du Gard aqueduct in southern France or the Great Museum in Amsterdam, but I can't. But if you know the historical and artistic context, going to these great sites are going to be twice as rewarding. So in a sense, that's the way to get a better value. If you're going to Mad King Ludwig's castle in Bavaria, the Disney castle that everybody loves to go to, Neuschwanstein, you need to know what Romanticism is all about. It looks medieval, but it's over-the-top neo-medieval, made in the same generation as the Eiffel Tower, from people who really wanted to underline their medieval roots. And it was this romantic approach to the Middle Ages that was in vogue in the late 1800s. The pointiest things in Europe, David, are faux medieval. They're not medieval. They're over-the-top fake medieval from the Romantic age 500 years later. The pointy church on the main square in Prague, the pointy castle in Segovia, the wonderfully pointy skyline in Bruges, the pointy halls of Parliament in London, and of course, Mad Ludwig's fairy tale castle with so many points on it. That's all the same generation, the 1870s and 1880s, neo-medieval, romantical.
So Patty asked about traveling now in the time of the pandemic or coming out of the pandemic, and what advice you might offer. Are there places that you think are more hospitable to people who have vaccines where they can travel now this summer? How are you approaching that, and how do you recommend people think about that?
Patience is not an American forte. It's certainly not a Rick Steves forte, but for the last year and 4 months, patience has been my middle name. As far as I'm concerned, and I've got a staff of 100 people and 100 guides in Europe and lots of people waiting to go to Europe. Europe is not open until it's all open. Right now, you could go to Cyprus, you could go to Croatia, you could go to Iceland. I'm not going to mess with it. I'm just going to wait a little while longer until it's all open. We're on a glide path to normalcy right now. And all we got to do is get our shots. And, we've had a stumbling start, and we've got certain people in our world, in our country, that just have a hang up with vaccines. In Europe, they've got some people that also have hang ups about vaccines, so they're slow. But Europe is realizing now that it's the number one source of foreign revenue for many countries. It's the number one source of employment for many countries. It's expensive to let these people digging in and not getting their vaccines stop their tourism industry from kicking back into gear. So Europe is on the move now, and they're going to be safe to travel in the next few months. My hunch is, and this is just, nobody's got a crystal ball, but you could travel right now. I've got friends over there right now, but I wouldn't mess with it. I'm just going to wait. But I think late in 2021, it will be, if the trajectory is the way we're looking at it now, it'll be okay to travel. For me, organizing thousands of people on Rick Steves bus tours, I'm not going to mess with it until next March. And we just opened our floodgates, David. We had, I think I mentioned, we had 30,000 people take our tours in 2019, our best year ever. We had 24,000 people signed up in February before COVID hit last year. We were almost sold out. We were just like exuberant. And then we had to shut it all down. And we really did the high road, the good ethical thing to do for a tour company. We just gave everybody back their money, no credits, no messing around. Here's your money. Let's stay in touch because Europe's going to be okay down the road. We just don't know when, and we're friends. We're going to make it happen again. Just last week, we opened the floodgate, and in 1 week, we had over 20,000 people sign up for our little company. That was just like amazing. But people are confident and they're ready to go, but we're not going to take deposits on tours until early 2022. I'd feel totally safe planning a trip now for 2022. 2021, you could do it, but I think it's going to be a little more frustrating than it needs to be because there might be frustrating limits to how many people can go into Anne Frank's house or how many people can be in the Pantheon at the same time or how many people can see the Last Supper or go up the Eiffel Tower. And you don't want to go to Paris and be shut out of the Eiffel Tower because they're only at 25% capacity or something like that. I would just say, hold on. I'm a traveling nut, and I'm just staying home and learning how to cook. So it's going to be all right.
So, Rick, Peggy from Fernandina Beach wants to know whether you've ever thought about doing some research and programming on places in the U.S. with European communities. I know our sponsor, for example, St. John's Cultural Council, would love it if you'd come to St. Augustine and talk about the first coast and the first European city. But have you ever thought about doing that?
I've got a party that I throw every Monday, just a virtual party, and 8,000 or 10,000 people join me, and we eat and we drink and we have a theme. And a month or two ago, I shared it with Samantha Brown, and you run her show too, I think, Places to Love. She's a great traveler, and she goes all over the world, and she does a lot of stuff in the United States that I don't do. And the theme was bits of Europe in the United States. And it was really fun. And we talked about it and celebrated it. And I think that's great. It's just not my beat. I'm really careful not to abuse my support, my celebrity status, my fans or whatever. I could make money by doing tours to Costa Rica or something like that. But I just do Europe, and I do it really well, and I love it, and I know it, and I've got friends there, and I don't just want to. I'm not a pretty face, so I just don't want to try to be a pretty face in front of the camera. I got to go where I really know, and for me, I'm so thankful that my beat is Europe. So my favorite country, India, Indonesia, Thailand, Japan. I love traveling in Asia.
And what is it about? We've had a question about India and why that is your favorite country.
In India, it just wallops your ethnocentrism. It rearranges all your cultural furniture. I thought I knew what music was. I'm a pretty well-trained pianist, and then you go to India, and at first it sounds like just a bunch of commotion, but then you realize, no, this is really sophisticated art, and there's no sense of meter or mode. In America, we're trained to hear, is it major or is it minor or other modes? We're trained to think, is it cut time, 3/4 time, 4/4 time, waltz time, all that. In India, there's no sense of mode and no sense of meter. It just humbled me. I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. I guess I don't appreciate that, but I can, and it's fun to be steep on the learning curve. In the United States, we are really, time is money. We bank it, we spend it, we invest it, we waste it. We do it just like money, time. In India, time is like bubblegum. You just play around with it. It's not worth a lot, and it's just frustrating for a time is money person to go to a country where time is not money. I like that kind of challenge for me. It just makes me thankful more than ever to get home, but it also gives me a respect for the fact that we are not the norm. And the world is filled with all sorts of diversity and beautiful, beautiful people. I just love that. And so India is a wonderland that way. India is one place where you don't need a guidebook's a good idea, but for my activities, what I'm going to do is leave the hotel and just walk in one direction until half the day is over, and then turn around and walk home. And it's just like a fantasy. And then the next day you just walk in the other direction, you do the same thing. It's quite an amazing experience.
Well, Rick, I want to thank you so much for sharing this time with us. And as we close this great conversation, I'd like to let our audience know that we have a special giveaway, and that you will shortly receive an email with a survey link. And we really would love for you to fill out the survey. It's how we make these events better and better. Oh, please fill it out. And if you fill out the survey and send it back, you'll be entered in a drawing to win a Rick Steves 5-book prize package. So that's
5 books. That's pretty cool.
That's pretty good.
One of them is probably my very latest, For the Love of Europe, is my top 100 experiences in 400 pages. So that's quite a prize.
That looks like a winner.
I love it. All right.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all of your insights with us, Rick. Thank you to the audience, and thank you to our sponsor this evening, the St. John's Cultural Council. And good night, everyone. Wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Happy travels.